to this edition of Border Report Live. My name is Rudy Mideles, and I am your host here in Harlingen, Texas, in the Rio Grande Valley of Deep South Texas. Got a great program lined up for you today. In just a little bit, our El Paso correspondent Julian Resendiz will be leading a conversation with U.S. Representative Gabe Vasquez of New Mexico to talk about a couple different topics, including his bipartisan bill recently introduced in Congress to hire civilians to monitor different imaging technician positions, at CBP, so that way that law enforcement officers can focus on more things like doing the actual inspections at ports of entry all along the border. And he's also part of the group of Democrats led by Representative Robin Kelly, who this morning introduced articles of impeachment against Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem. So we're going to hear from him on those articles of impeachment in just a little bit. But first, as always, let's go ahead and start today's program by taking a look at what's trending across the border. It was a week ago today that Renee Good was killed by an ICE agent in Minneapolis. Since then, protests have spread throughout Minnesota. Last night, federal officers dropped tear gas and sprayed eye irritant at activists during another day of confrontations in the city of Minneapolis. Dramatic footage shows federal officers deploying flashbangs, as you can see there on your screen, into a small crowd of protesters standing across the street from the Whipple Federal Building. A judge made no immediate decision today on Minnesota's request to suspend the Trump administration's immigration crackdown in the state, where federal agents have yanked people from cars and confronted angry protesters demanding they pack up and leave. With the Department of Homeland Security pledging to send more than 2,000 immigration officers into Minnesota, the state, joined by Minneapolis and St. Paul, sued President Donald Trump's administration Monday to halt or limit the surge. Homeland Security says it has made more than 2,000 arrests in the state since early December and is vowing to not back down. The Trump administration has repeatedly defended the immigration agent who shot Good, a 37-year-old mother of three, saying he acted in self-defense. But that explanation has been criticized by Minneapolis Mayor Jacob Frey, Minnesota Governor Tim Walz, and others based on videos of the confrontation. In the past few days, at least 5 prosecutors have resigned over controversy over how the U.S. Justice Department is handling the investigation, according to people familiar with the matter. Separately, a Justice Department official said Wednesday that there is no basis for a criminal civil rights investigation. An FBI probe of Renee Good's death is ongoing. Among those leaving in Minnesota is the first Assistant U.S. Attorney Joseph Thompson, who had been leading the investigation and prosecution of fraud schemes in the state. And he was also appointed as acting U.S. Attorney for the state of Minnesota by President Trump in June, a position that he held until October of last year. At least 4 other prosecutors are resigning amid a period of tension in the office. Also, a top Justice Department official says there is not currently any basis to open a criminal civil rights investigation into the killing of a woman by a U.S. Immigration Customs Enforcement officer in Minneapolis, as we mentioned just a short moment ago. In other news, the Congressional Progressive Caucus is vowing to block funding for Homeland Security unless there's significant reform to immigration enforcement. And that includes the demasking of ICE agents, requiring warrants for arrests and ending private detention facilities. Congressman Henry Cuellar, who represents parts of South Texas, is a ranking member on the Subcommittee of Homeland Appropriations, and we had a chance to ask him if he agrees with the caucus's approach to hold back funding. Take a listen.
And it's important to make sure that ICE does what they're supposed to be doing. And this is why the oversight by Congress on the appropriations is going to be extremely important. So I've asked members for input, and I've gotten different input from members. We want to be very thoughtful as we add that language. And I'm hoping that sometime by the end of this weekend that we're able to come to an agreement. I do not support a CR. I think it's more important to get language and compromise and work this out to provide oversight on ICE.
The Senate and the House are working to meet an end-of-the-month deadline to approve a series of funding bills to avoid a partial government shutdown. Time now to bring in our El Paso correspondent Julian Resendiz and our guest for today's program, U.S. Representative Gabe Vasquez of New Mexico. Thank you so much for joining us, sir.
Rudy,
It's a pleasure to be here.
thank you. Thank you. Welcome, sir. Rudy, as you know, for the past couple of years, it's been very hard to get legislation passed in Congress because of the partisan divide. However, when there's legislation that is co-sponsored by Democrats and Republicans, we can say that there's always a chance. And in this case, Representative Vasquez, I want to talk about the bill that you and U.S. Rep. Juan Ciscomani, the Republican from Arizona, introduced very recently in the House. And the reason that we are interested in that bill is because there's a glimmer of hope that if it gets approved, it's going to make a difference as far as speeding up cargo at the international bridges, as far as maybe keeping more inspection booths open and making it easier for those of us who commute back and forth the U.S.-Mexico border to come across. Can you please tell us about your bill?
Yeah, thank you so much, Julian. You know, when I came to Congress, one of the things that I was focused on was making sure that I was doing positive things for my community, and that meant improving the border economy. Now, I've been able to cross the border probably thousands of times over the time of my life, and I know how long those lines can be, sometimes 3 to 4 hours, completely unacceptable. Now, my colleague to the west, who represents a district in Arizona, also shares ports of entry. When we came here to Congress together, we formed the bipartisan Southwest Caucus and agreed to work on things that were going to work for our districts and that had common sense solutions to improve our border economy. Well, in this case, you know, I was at the Santa Teresa port of entry probably about a year and a half ago as they were installing new X-ray technology to scan cargo as it was coming across the Santa Teresa port. And in that facility, they had CBP agents, customs agents, in makeshift trailers that were scanning essentially every image as it came across the linea, as it came across the line. And they had to take them off other duties in order to do that. They said they were understaffed to be able to operate this new technology. However, the technology worked wonders because it spotted contraband, not just drugs, but shipments of exotic animals, counterfeit goods, you name it. And what that meant was that for those trucks that are coming across the border by the dozens of thousands every single day through Santa Teresa, they no longer had to be stopped. All they had to do was go through the X-ray, and if there was something flagged in the X-ray, then they could be on their way. And it meant faster logistics for those companies that were doing business with the United States, which is terrific. What they asked of me, they said, please, we need more staff. And I said, well, do you need more customs agents or do you need staff that just looks at these images? And so this bill, the Best Facilitation Act, is a compromise that Ciscomani and myself have come up with together to create a new position within CBP so that we can fill these trailers with image technicians that are trained to find those anomalies in those cars and those trailers, because this technology is now moving also to non-commercial vehicles. So with that, more trailers are being added, more technicians are needed, and it doesn't take resources away from CBP agents.
Yeah, to oversimplify for our audience, Congressman, so basically we're talking about the hiring of non-law enforcement federal employees, civilians to oversimplify, to look over the images, and whenever they see something wrong, something suspicious, then they call in the guys with the training, with the guns, the CBP officers. And we've discussed in the past in this show how difficult it is to hire more CBP officers, because not only because of funding, but also because of the training time involved. It takes about a year, maybe longer, to train a recruit and have him with the uniform, with the gun at the border, doing the CBP inspection duties. So this bill would kind of expedite by hiring non-law enforcement, having them monitor those very important cameras and other technology, and then just raising a red flag as appropriate.
That's right. And Julian, this is why it also makes our country safer, is because oftentimes we rely on the instincts of the CBP agents to determine if a manifesto is real or not, to see if there are signs of suspicion within the driver, essentially to go around the truck, to have to open the truck if something is suspicious. That takes time, and oftentimes a lot of drugs aren't found that way. And if a CBP agent determines that that person isn't suspicious, but yet that truck was actually loaded with tons of fentanyl, we have a much better way to do that now with these image scanners. They're state of the art, and you're not going to miss anything. And so in addition to speeding up traffic, which is good for business, which entices business on the border, we also now have a much better opportunity to be able to catch all those illicit drugs to much higher rates. And at the Santa Teresa port of entry, my understanding is that up to 75 to 80% of commercial cargo is now going through this technology, using this technology. The other 20%, my understanding is because those trucks refuse to go through the X-ray, and so then they do get pulled over to secondary for a physical scanning.
Yes, and just to oversimplify again for our audience, even though you're from New Mexico, Mr. Siscoman is from Arizona, this bill would apply to the entire border, and in fact, also, I imagine the northern border, as well as any other ports of entry inland, right? Like airports and stuff?
That's correct.
All right. Mr. Vasquez, well, anything else on this topic? Because I do have another question to ask you.
That's it.
Well, we're going to get into that next conversation after a very quick break. So stay with us. Border Report Live. We'll be back in 2 minutes. And welcome back to this edition of Border Report Live. Bringing back in now our El Paso correspondent Julian Resendiz and our guest for today's program, Congressman Gabe Vasquez of New Mexico.
Really, Mr. Vasquez, we know that immigration has been a very divisive issue for the past few years here in America. However, things have taken extreme turns in the past few weeks. And I understand that you are part of a group that is co-sponsoring articles of impeachment for Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem. Can you tell us about that and also about the prospects of this impeachment going forward, given the current very slightly current Republican majority?
Well, this is a non-privileged resolution. This is a non-privileged resolution that was introduced just yesterday morning. And the case is clear as to why we should impeach Secretary Noem. What we've seen is an agency that has gone rogue, that has absolutely no care for the rule of law, that has profiled folks all across the country. But beyond profiling and asking for papers, we're seeing a rash of violence break out on the streets of cities predominantly that this administration is targeting. Democratic communities, we've seen it in LA, we've seen it in Chicago, we've seen it now in Minneapolis. And the brutal violence that it continues to play out across the street, I think goes against our American values and who we are as a people. But more so, when you look at the handling of natural disasters in places like Ruidoso, New Mexico, when the secretary promised us relief, promised that small-time community relief that we never got, her lack of support for that community in Texas that took months to distribute money, the 2 private jets that she bought to the tune of $172 billion, the fact that we think she's violating the Constitution by not allowing members of Congress to enter ICE facility as is written in law. Those are just some of the things that are completely egregious. She seems to be ignoring, the rules of law, and also has just abdicated her responsibility, which is a huge one, overseeing an agency like ICE. And to be quite fair, I believe that they're instigating conflict in some of these communities, and are getting caught up in that crossfire.
Yes, sir. The other part of the question was, how likely do you think this resolution is this resolution to pass?
Well, we'll have to see about that. Right now, there's more support that's being gathered. I know I was one of the original 50 co-sponsors on this resolution because it's the right thing to do. We don't need terror on our streets, and we don't need somebody who's going to foment this type of this terror that is currently happening. We will need to get more members on board in order to have this be successful. I believe that count will continue to go up, but I think what's really important right now is that Congress acts when the people are asking us to act. And this is one of the most important things that we can do at this moment to signal that Secretary Noem is not fit to serve. And so it will be a difficult path for this impeachment resolution to pass. I'm not going to lie about that. The most important thing is that the American public knows that members of Congress have their back and that we'll try to do everything we can to make sure we bring justice back to our streets.
Now, speaking of immigration, just west of us, in the past couple of days, lawmakers in Arizona are concerned about a stepped up ICE enforcement, maybe some more raids in the Phoenix area. I'd like to ask you about New Mexico. What kind of ICE activity are we seeing in New Mexico, especially in southern New Mexico? And are you concerned, or what's your take on a possible step up of this activity in your district?
Well, unfortunately, in southern New Mexico, we've seen constant presence of ICE and Border Patrol for many, many decades, especially in communities like Chaparral and Vado and Chamberino and Sunland Park and Santa Teresa, given our proximity to the border. We have seen smaller operations, including in those communities I just mentioned that are very targeted at certain individuals or certain families. We have seen instances just recently, I believe, in Santa Teresa, in which ICE agents were patrolling a residential construction site, presumably to check the identification of the construction workers. As we're trying to build housing for our growing industrial base, ICE is out there trying to potentially take our workers away, which is terrible and awful. In Albuquerque, we've certainly seen an increased presence of ICE agents there and small targeted operations there. Look, it is the weight of the president and where he chooses to target next. And God forbid he never target New Mexico, because we've seen what's happened in LA and Chicago and in Minnesota. But ICE presence certainly is here in southern New Mexico and in Albuquerque. But from what we've seen so far, there have been one-off operations here and there.
All right. Now, I also read that you're opposed to some border wall construction. We know that there's border wall construction in New Mexico near El Paso in the Sunland Park, New Mexico area. But there's also new construction that was announced in a very remote part of the state that borders a very remote part of Mexico as well. And that is the Boot Heel of New Mexico. Can you tell us about your concerns there?
Yeah, I can tell you it's a ridiculous waste of money. They want to spend something like $1.6 billion to build a border wall in one of the most rugged and unpassable terrains on the U.S.-Mexico border, right there near the Big Hachita, Big Hatchet and the Little Hatchet and Hachita. That terrain is nearly unsurmountable on foot. You take the Animas Mountains, the Animas Range right next to it, and the Peloncillos right next to it, mountains that go deep into Mexico. There is already a wall. It's a natural wall. That's the reason why the border crossings, the pedestrian border crossings that are outside of the ports of entry have historically been incredibly low in that area. So we're spending $1.6 billion of taxpayer money to solve a problem that doesn't really exist. There's no nearby infrastructure, no nearby highways. There's really no way to get to a major population center. And they're just, essentially using this slush fund, this $150 billion that they got from Trump's big, beautiful bill, and throwing it at projects without any validation of whether they actually work or not. I questioned Secretary Pete Hegseth about his knowledge of the U.S.-Mexico border, considering that it is now under a militarized zone. And I asked him just simply to point out where the border was on the map of New Mexico, and he couldn't do that. I asked him to point out where the Animas Mountains were, the largest range right there in the Boot Heel. He could not do that. I asked him about AST, technology and about aerostat technology. Sir, do you know what that is? He says, no, you tell me. So clearly these military operations and this investment by DHS are predicated on folks who know nothing about these special landscapes. These are important places for wildlife crossings. They're going to impact some of the ranchers that are in those communities as well, and they're going to be ineffective. And I can tell you during those monsoon seasons, when that water comes rushing at 80, 90 CFS, We've seen this in Arizona. They will blow those walls out, but they don't care because they just want the slogan and the image. There's much better ways to achieve border security, and I believe that we can achieve border security using ASTs, using more foot sensors, using that forward operating base south of Lordsburg, and using aerostats.
I did reach out to federal officials on that regard because it did catch my attention about the remoteness of the Boot Hill in New Mexico. One of the responses I got is that they're concerned about cartel activity in that area, specifically close to the town of El Berrendo in Mexico.
Repeat that town?
El Berrendo, right next to Antelope Wells.
Oh, yeah. The cartels will operate in much more sophisticated ways than trying to scale a border wall. I can tell you that. The cartels already are, and that's what we really should be worried about. You know, I just recently introduced a bill as well that allows local law enforcement and other state agencies and federal agencies to be able to shoot down drones that are coming from Mexico that are essentially spy drones from the cartels. If you talk to Border Patrol today, either one of our New Mexico stations, and you ask them about drones, that's one of their number one concerns, is that the cartels have a step up ahead of them, and they will choose to cross, and they will choose the method of crossing based on where the assets that we have on the ground currently are. But currently, we're not taking care of the drone issue. And so that's something that we really have to pay attention to, something we really have to do. And they do have the intel of where the cartels operate. We have had that intel for many years, but that area of the Boot Hill traditionally has not been a place where folks have risked their lives, essentially, to walk hundreds of miles with no access to a nearby road to drop off a load of whatever it is. That's why you see the majority of trafficking surrounding the inner cities in places like Tucson, El Paso, Nogales.
We've been speaking with Congressman Gabe Vasquez of New Mexico on a multitude of topics this afternoon. I really wish we had more time, but unfortunately, Congressman, we are out of time for this. But we did want to say thank you for coming on the program today, and hopefully we can call on you in the future to continue the conversation.
Muchas gracias. Thank you, gentlemen.
All right, well, stay with us. Border Report Live will be back with one last headline for you in about 2 minutes. Welcome back to this edition of Border Report Live. My name is Rudy Mireles, and I am your host here in Harlingen, Texas, in the Rio Grande Valley of deep South Texas. We've got one more headline to get over to you this afternoon. Tuesday marked the first day of the Tennessee legislative session of 2026. The Republican supermajority has already been hard at work behind the scenes, getting some help from the White House. House Speaker Cameron Sexton is reportedly working with U.S. Homeland Security Advisor Stephen Miller to crack down on illegal immigration in Tennessee. Republicans like House Majority Leader William Lamberth supports the action.
If you're a legal immigrant or a citizen, you're welcome in Tennessee. But if you're an illegal immigrant, you are simply not welcome here. So you're going to see a number of bills that are filed by a lot of my colleagues to make sure that Tennessee really tightens up our laws to make sure that we are insistent that you come here legally, not illegally.
Other Republican-backed immigration bills, including making it a crime for someone in the country illegally to drive a commercial vehicle in the state. Another would keep certain immigration enforcement actions confidential, making it a felony if someone didn't follow the law. The most controversial legislation would require families to prove their child is a U.S. citizen or pay tuition to go to public school. Democrats, despite being in a super minority, plan to push back with their own bills on immigration, including one that would ban ICE from schools, churches, and other government-owned lots. Really quick, before we go, we wanted to remind you to check out our friends at Political Power Ranker. It is a show tracking the movers, shakers, and rule makers in American politics every single week. Nextstar's Director of Political Content, Chris Berg, and Director of Emerson College Polling, Spencer Kimball, break down who's up and who's down in the world of politics based on data. This week's episode is focusing on the Lone Star State right here, the state of Texas. So you're not going to want to miss out as It has a lot to do with the border. So make sure to check out Political Power Ranker at abc27.com or your local Nexstar station's website. And don't forget, if you'd like to stay informed on the things shaping the U.S.-Mexico border, like that conversation we just had with U.S. Representative Gabe Vasquez of New Mexico, you can do so on your commute home, while at the gym, or walking the dog, as we bring you real-time updates, expert insights, and voices from both sides of the border. You can listen now on Apple Podcasts, iHeartRadio, Spotify, and the YouTube app. That's going to do it for us today. For Julian Resendiz in El Paso, my name is Rudy Mideles here in Harlingen, Texas. We'll see you next time.